Welcome to the Managing the Smart Mind podcast with your host, Coach Kramer. This is episode 64, The Beautiful Vision of Judith Gaton, part 1. Hey, smart human. I've actually never told you why I suddenly started doing interviews. So I thought I'd do a quick intro before the intro to tell you why it matters to me that you get to listen to other fast-brained humans and learn about how they have designed an amazing life. What I want from these interviews is for you to be inspired, right? To be like, oh my God, that's another thing that's possible. To have like information, right? To realize, oh my God, maybe I could try this thing, or maybe I could combine these things, and to have validation. You're not mad. You just have a beautiful brain that is very smart. And that means that contrary to a lot of other people, you have to basically make some extra effort to design a life that works well for you, right? So inspiration, information, validation, and of course, fun. Right? This is also meant to be fun to listen to, which, by the way, is also what you'll get when you join the Shamelessly Smart membership. So do check that out if you haven't already. Okay, let's move on to my amazing guest today, Judith Gaton. She is a master certified life coach, a personal stylist, a lawyer, and entrepreneur. She's also the author of the book, How to Be a Fucking Lady, a modern guide to being charming and fierce as fuck, and the host of the scintillating podcast, Style Masterclass with Miss J. She is the founder of the Modern Charm School, an exclusive online social club for women who are ready to leave their mark on the world, which, by the way, is very much what she's doing herself. She's definitely walking the talk. Whether it's through style, commanding more, creating wealth, she is the guide you need to take your life to the next level. And we had the best time talking together about being a smart cookie, as she sort of defines it. And in this first part of our 90-minute interview, we look at her incredibly interesting career path. Again, many of you may recognize this. And we'll dive into topics like code switching, becoming a master negotiator, dancing to stay sane, and Judith's amazing choreography projects and how good they were for her brain. We talk about how she got her first degree in fashion, and the importance, again, of just doing stuff that lights you up on all levels, not just science, not just creating things with your hands, but all the things. We talk about when and when not to raise your hand when someone else makes a mistake. We talk about her switch from fashion to law and her nervous breakdown after her mentor actually died 30 days into her practice. We talk about her working with big attorneys with big egos, and when it comes to running a business, about trying to do it the proper but very boring way, which sadly for us creative, smart-brained humans hardly ever works. So enjoy this first part, this beautiful interview with Judith Gaton. Welcome, Judith Gaton. We're going to start with something. I was actually just watching you on YouTube, speaking about I can't even say it. Elocution.
Elocution, yes.
Right? So there we are. Let's start there. Why does that matter to you? Why is it important?
Oh, it's so fascinating. So I am Puerto Rican by descent. So my people come from the island, and accents has always been very interesting because I think it's a very interesting part of, and I'm just going to say American culture, to have a lot of thoughts based on someone's accent, whether you think they're intelligent or not. And I grew up in a family of accents. So not everyone has an accent, but a lot of them do. And my mom grew up in Brooklyn. So she has inflections of like Brooklyn accent, but also she used to do simultaneous translating for certain agencies during undercover operations. I will just say that.
Amazing.
My mother's a fascinating woman. And she has a very California front-facing accent, but in the right crowd, you'll see her code switch almost to an accent. And my father has a very accented way of speaking. And I think what's so interesting is the ideas about their intelligence based on how I saw people perceive them when they spoke, which I just think is extremely fascinating. My grandmother was very, very dark skinned, my maternal grandmother, and my maternal grandfather was very, very light skinned. He actually had the heavier accent, but because he was blonde hair and blue eyed, the initial perception of him was one way, and then they would hear him speak and then it was another. And same with my grandmother. So it was so fun as a kid to kind of watch people's responses and, always watching the adult faces around me like, oh, so you all think this really matters. So the way I speak is going to get your attention differently.
Yes.
And as a, little smart cookie when I was younger, I observed this in adults around me. I grew up in a not great neighborhood. So there's always these presumptions about, the kids on the street. So people would come yell at us and then they would sort of send me to the front and I'd be like, ma'am, we're just playing a game. Everything's fine. No one's vandalizing anything or harming anyone. Do you have any questions for me? I mean, like little kid, right?
This is amazing.
The adult would immediately be like, oh, and I'd be like, oh, thank you very much for your concern. We would all go back about our business. I'm sure we were running amok. Absolutely. But I remember one time distinctly, we were in a tennis court and someone sent their mom to come yell at us. And of course I got pushed to the front and I was like, ma'am, how can I help you?
I love it. And listen, just I think for the mainly European part of the audience podcast, they may not be familiar with the term code switching.
Okay. So it's the idea that based upon whom you're communicating to, you would change not only your regular speech pattern, your accent, your language choice, your diction would change. You would modulate the tone of your voice, your use of vernacular or slang or colloquialisms or idiomatic expressions. Like all those things would like instantly change. And if you're biracial or if you grew up in a house of different languages or different accents, you learn to do that to navigate very easily between different,
to survive also probably.
To survive. Yeah. Absolutely.
Very, very important. I actually have a podcast on what I call the chameleon complex, which is basically when you do so much code switching, you forget who you are, right? And your sort of core identity. Well, let's quickly go back to elocution. Am I saying it the right way?
You're saying it perfectly. I know exactly what you're saying. And that's the key of communication, I think, that we lose sight of, because there's so much emphasis on smoothing accents or speaking in a particular way that we lose sight of what the heart of good communication is, which is, are you being understood? Are you speaking to be understood? And are you being understanding?
Exactly. And also just knowing that words really matter.
Yes.
Right. They matter so much in so many different ways. But just going back to that smart cookie part, since when have you known you were a smart cookie?
Very, very early. I remember being in preschool and being bored, so bored in preschool. And negotiating with adults very early on about how not to be disruptive. So,
interesting.
In preschool, I remember having conversations with my preschool teacher. I used to throw major tantrums too, which didn't help the situation. But then I would also negotiate. So it was like a 4-year-old maniac terrorist. And I remember being 4 and I could read books at that point. I was fully speaking in paragraphs. Like if you want to know my thought about something, I would tell you. And I remember
so good.
The deal with my preschool teacher was I didn't have to take a nap, but I couldn't leave the mat. So we had these sleep mats.
Right.
And I remember being confined and I was like, well, you said I couldn't leave it, but you didn't say how I was to be on it. And I remember just like having a whole imaginary play by myself on the mat and all the other little kids around. Still disruptive, but I was on the mat. And for every probably level through high school even, there was some negotiation of, you can leave campus. If you're 18 now, you can sign yourself out. You don't have to come to all your classes anymore. Just come take your tests. That way you're not disrupted.
Okay. You manage that. That's pretty cool.
I was on a no homework policy.
Amazing.
Which my classmates and I negotiated in high school. So long as we maintained A's, we didn't have to do homework because why?
Well, and exactly, but so many schools don't understand this, right? And I think lots of listeners probably also have like gifted children who have to sit in classes and do homework that is so repetitive and boring. So I love that your school understood this.
I was lucky enough. It was beautiful. I think about this now. My experience is so different from so many other people in the school system. In the second grade was when our gifted program began. My mom was a single mom working, and she forgot to take me to my exam.
Oh, bless.
And my teacher was like, "Yeah, she's in. I can't take
right.
her. She's in.
No test necessary."
And I was in this very unique group of about 12 students, and we would be in the same classes, probably actually starting in second grade all the way through high school together. And they were all very gifted. Like I was one of 10, 12 students. We had different math, we had different science starting in second grade. So while everyone was learning division, we were already in algebra.
Yeah.
So it was kind of unique in that I wasn't alone in my smart cookiness.
Yeah, you got validation, which
I had my peeps. I had the difference though, is my home life was very different than the other smart cookies. So I think I had the added benefit of street smarts and the other kinds of smarts. So I don't lament any of it, but I think I was very lucky in that regard.
Yeah, I think so too. I think a lot of very quote unquote smart cookies, then when they either go to university or they start work, it's like there's a bit of like hitting a wall, which is called reality. And that can be quite painful for sure. Yeah. So how did you keep it interesting? What did you do instead of homework?
Oh, ooh. I danced a lot. So particularly during high school, there was about 4 hours a day of dance because I was going out of my mind. And I had to move my body.
Right. All this energy, right? Which you have to do shit needs to go somewhere.
It has to go somewhere. And probably in elementary school, I was very like tinkery. Like I would play with, if there's a slip of paper on my desk, so chances are I would be folding it into some sort of shape or figuring out how to carefully cut it so I can make multiple shapes out of the one, like that kind of thing. And as a high schooler, it was just a lot of dance. And then enlisting people to dance with me in these big choreographed numbers of like 20 students or more. I was like, okay. We called them fashion shows, which I think is hilarious now in retrospect. But they were these huge choreographed numbers. There would be like 3 or 4 numbers per show. So it would be months of preparation, and I get to stimulate my brain for months on end. And that started sophomore year through my senior year.
I love it because it's also so complex, right? There's so much you need to think about. It's like, okay, how do I make the move? Like, how do I do the choreography? How do I sort of interact with the surroundings? Then there's, I presume, costumes, maybe.
Of course. Yeah.
And of course, music, like picking.
And music. Yeah. And then figuring out who's really talented so that we can recruit them in this crazy scheme. And then getting administrators and teachers on board to let us out of class to perpetuate the crazy scheme. And there's a lot of orchestrating of this madness that, thank God, I would have been cuckoo otherwise. Like, I'm so grateful for it. I look back and I'm like, where were the grown-ups? I have questions, but
but this sounds perfect, right? And actually, this is what a lot of gifted adults need, is something like this, right, to keep them happy. So, what happened when you sort of went off to university? What did you decide to study and why?
So, I decided to become a fashion designer initially. That was the initially.
Why?
I really like, somewhere along the way, I love the idea of you can draw something and then you can go make it.
It becomes real.
Like, not only like, that is just the coolest thing. And I still do that to this day. It just has a new iteration, but so I was sketching a lot. And I wanted to become a fashion designer. And I went to New York and I went to Marymount. It was an all women's college. And it was the best college experience. Like I had the best college experience. I really did. Also slightly bored. So of course my course load was like 18 credits, 21 credits. And then they maxed me out at 24. They're like, you're not allowed.
You can't do it anymore.
You can't do it anymore. We're cutting you off. So then I would audit classes. I was like, oh, can I just go sit in there? And I had a lovely French professor who was like, you can audit any class. You just come sit with me. It's fine. So it was, and I was on student government. So I was also still orchestrating things and in plays and busy, which is so good for my brain. Like, I think sometimes I'm not a big fan of the busy badge, but also my brain needs a high level of stimulation for me to feel happy and contented.
100%. I think for most of the listeners, right? And they may think they're getting it because they're getting a lot of like stressful, similar stuff. Maybe even high stakes, but it's getting that multi-dimensional sort of, having to think about lots of different things. I think is so important.
Yeah, using the different parts of your, I mean, if you believe in the idea that the brains are compartmented, I know there's some differences in ideas.
There is neuroscience. We can talk about that. Like, but no need right now.
I'm like, are you a right brain, left brain believer or not?
Yeah, so like, no, not on this podcast. It's been debunked so many times.
It has been totally debunked, but I do think that most of us are multifaceted beings. We are not one-dimensional. Right. And while we may be good at one thing, that is not our lot in life to remain prescribed and tethered to this one thing. I mean, so many of my friends have these amazing passions and talents and things that kind of secret, little hidden like things that they like to play with because they're so afraid of like, well, I'm known for this one thing.
Exactly. Right. And I don't want to confuse people, or if they're entrepreneurs, like I don't want to dilute the brand. It's actually quite the opposite. But tell me, what happened? Did you finish like college, or did you, because I know you did something else after that.
Part of the way through college, I realized I got feedback from a professor and she said that I was technically perfect, but boring.
Not bad.
Well, I mean, it appealed to one part of my brain. I was like, technical perfection? Like,
I mean, come on.
Right? So if your couture, professor tells you, that you drape something perfectly, yeah, of course that appeals. But my 20-something-year-old brain couldn't take the rejection that it was boring. And then I thought, well, this is going to be really hard. I should go be a lawyer.
This is what I do not understand. This little logic really escapes me. Explain.
Well, I was really smart.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so check that box.
Yeah.
I was really good at research. Okay, check that box. I have the gift of gab. Okay, check that box. And it was something I could control. Right? So I don't think this is actually true, but this was a 20-something-year-old logic. So my artistic ability, I think it's so funny. Creativity is such a funny beast. And now I recognize like my taste is high, my ability is low, but the ability will match my taste eventually. I didn't give it that chance.
Yeah.
Instead, I said, oh, my ability was high and my taste, I guess, was too low. And I didn't know how to factor that in or fix that.
But I knew how to be in that area. Yeah.
Right. But I knew how to be a good student.
Yeah. Of course you did.
I was a master of being an excellent student. So I would just go be an excellent student for 2 more years. When I finished college early, I finished law school early. The antsiness of it, but that makes sense for me.
Listen, was there anything specifically about law that attracted you? Or was it just a sort of rational, okay, this ticks several boxes, it's a sound economic.
Lawyer.
Oh my God.
I met a fashion lawyer. So I went to a special symposium. I mean, this is my nerd level, right? So I went to symposium at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. Yes. And they had this amazing symposium on the life of Chanel, blah, blah, blah. And then I met who would be later the forefronts of Proenza Schuler, which is an amazing luxury brand. And they were so silly. I mean, we meet these two back in the day. They were just like, I don't know, we're cutting things. We need help. We have people, blah, blah. Like they were so like, oh, and here's a lawyer. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I met the lawyer and he was like, yeah, it's like this budding new area of law. It's like, oh, I could marry the two. It did not actually work out. And that's most lawyers' stories. We have these grandiose visions of.
Yeah, but I am interested in like, well, because usually there is a red thread, right? So it was there. Basically. Yeah.
The little thread was there.
Yes.
The hope that one day I could do these contracts for these big fashion houses. And that's not, I mean, that wasn't my story, but that was the vision. Yeah.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey, smart human. You're probably listening to this podcast because you want to learn how to manage that smart mind of yours. And the first step is actually getting your bearings, doing a little brain audit. And I have the perfect tool for that, the Mapping Your Unique Brain Workbook. And you can actually download it for free at www.coachkramer.org/brainmap. So that's coachkramer.org/brainmap. Go check it out and play with it and take your first step to managing your smart mind. So you finished law school super fast.
Super fast.
And then what?
And then I got a mentor who died about 3 months into practice.
Oh, no.
Mickey Lawson, God bless him, rest his soul. He was one of the most fascinating attorneys. He had this he was so opposite to me, which I think was the attraction. He would just roll up to, even now I get started, I'm sweating thinking about it. He would just go to court, like no prep, and just shoot the shit with people. And he had this lax, he would even hold his body in like a very leany kind of fashion, and would like wink at people. Like he was just, he had this thing that I did not have, or I didn't recognize that I had. Maybe he spotted it in me, and I just remember being so stressed out around him. And then he died suddenly. He had pancreatic cancer and it just took him. Oh. So then I had to open up my own practice after about 3 months of being in practice for the first time as a baby attorney. I don't recommend this.
No, I get that. Like, not good for the nervous system.
It was a terrible idea. And because I had no mentor at that point and I was a solo practitioner, I didn't know what to be afraid of. So I would just do wild things. And the book said I could do it. And this law says I can do it, or doesn't say I can't do it. So, Your Honor, I'm asking you, and I used to get in trouble all the time. Like, oh, Miss Huber, what do you have today? Kind of saying.
Right. What wild madness is she bringing today?
Yeah, I remember there's one judge in particular, and his name, and I won't say his name, but his name fits his behavior on the bench. I'll just say, it's so funny. And he was like, you can't. I'll never forget. He was so pissed at me. And I was like, but I can. And I can. And you have to sign it. He could have totally held me in contempt. He totally could have. And he was just like, get out of my courtroom. I hope to never see you again. Get out of my courtroom.
But I think when I hear this is like a story I hear often from when I work with people, the stories they tell about being a student and explain to their teacher that they've actually made a mistake or that it isn't actually right. Like, let's say a teacher would start talking about left brain, right brain, and they'd raise their hand and say, well, excuse me. But I just have to point out.
Well, actually, that's what we called it amongst ourselves, my group of 10. It was a actually. It gets you in trouble. And the talk my mom had with me about the actually thing was like, no one's going to be your friend if you keep doing this.
This is about contextual or situational awareness, right? Which is a superpower just as much as being super smart. You definitely need both.
We need both. And my mom was very worried I wasn't going to have any friends, which is very funny to me now, but She was very worried about this. That was her thing. If you're a know-it-all, no one's going to be your friend. If you keep raising your hand and telling people, well, actually, and correcting adults, they're not going to like you and they're going to make your life miserable. You have to stop this. So then I passed it along to my group of 10. I was like, all right, apparently we are not supposed to raise our hands and correct people.
Which there's also like a dark side to that, right? Because I call that smart shaming, which is what people do all the time with kids. And then it actually, and especially women, it stops them from speaking up and raising their hand. So there's such a fine line, right? Like, especially if you have kids, of course, you want to protect them. You want to make sure they don't get beaten up too much or, you know, hated on by teachers or other adults. But you also want them to, raise their hand when they see something that's not right or that's just false, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's why I love being at an all women's college, frankly, because there was no men in the room dynamic, right? Because often I've observed women will raise their hand. If a man raises their hand, they put their hand down.
Insane, right?
And men will continue to just have their hand raised, and women are like waiting for their polite moment. Where if you get a room full of women and you suddenly let them know, like, there are no dudes, you can raise your hand.
Yeah, it's safe.
It's safe, and it was a very cool dynamic. Very, very cool dynamic.
There's still so much work to do in this arena. But before I get too distracted on my soapbox, so what happened? I mean, you started talking about all this stuff that people were like, what the hell is she talking about? And she's right, but it's ridiculous. Then what?
Then I had a little nervous breakdown.
Mm-hmm. What is a little nervous breakdown?
I had like a really bad nervous breakdown. I had a very grueling trial that lasted over a year. And half of it was spent during the sanction hearings with the attorneys threatening to sanction each other.
Oh.
I was 25. I was, right in retrospect, like what feels to me like a baby at the time.
Yeah.
And series of events occurred, and my last day in court on that trial, the judge looked at me and she mouths to me from the bench, "Never again." And I nodded at her, and then she goes, "Miss," my legal name is, last name is Hoover. She said, "Miss Hoover is excused from further proceedings." And I kept the paper. I wrote, "Miss Hoover is excused from further proceedings," because I was in such state of like numb shock,
complete trauma response.
And I like walked out in like this numb fugue state and packed up my office and brought it home. And I told my husband, we have to figure something else out because I can't do this in this way. And about a month later, I got recruited to a big law firm.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a beautiful little resting place to come home to. They were very kind. They clearly knew something had gone down and they didn't ask too many questions. And we're just like, right, like something weird has occurred. We don't know quite what, but we know you're a brilliant litigator and you've won on appeal way more times than you should have by your age. So clearly there's something special about you, and we don't know what the hell happened and we don't care. We just need your brain.
Yeah.
And I had about 3 years of healing in that.
That's beautiful.
Protected bubble. Yeah, it was beautiful. And then I got recruited again. And then I became a managing partner of that firm.
Mm-hmm.
Also lovely humans. And I had a very, I used to handle what we call catastrophic claims. So people who'd been catastrophically injured and were not likely to recover from their injuries. And
that's intense.
Very intense. And I handled some cases that involved some very public events. I won't say specifically what.
Right.
And it took its toll.
As in like empathy, etc.
And my empathy was high. Yeah. And because I had been at this point through so much therapy and things, I could recognize things in others. Also hyper vigilant as a child. So I was always very aware of what other people's facial expressions were doing, their body language was doing. So it made me
what made you such a good litigator.
Yes. And brilliant at that, right? Because I could read the room and be like, oh, okay, we're losing them. All right, here's
let's change the energy. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me just, okay, hold up. And I would get in trouble for that sometimes. And sometimes it was considered brilliant. I mean, any number of things could happen, but I had a really good relationship with probably what would be considered the top attorneys in this area who'd been practicing for 40 years, who were notorious for being assholes.
Mm-hmm.
And I developed really amazing relationships with them because I could think creatively.
Yeah.
I was like, look, just call me. Don't send me nasty emails. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Call a girl up. Let's figure some shit out. If I have money, I'll give you money. I'll tell you I have money, but we're not doing this shit where we're mean to each other for 5 years. We're going to be married to each other. These cases don't close overnight. So now we're in this nasty marriage, or we could have it be very amicable and we could visit the kids on the weekend and it could be lovely.
That's so perfect, right? And basically this is like the version, I mean, many people try to do this at work, say, listen, I know, you know, this is just a ridiculous game, right? And we can play it like the proper way and it will be exhausting and awful. You can just cut the crap. I love it.
We can just cut the crap. Like those cases are notorious for like scorched earth litigation and things that don't benefit the person at the heart of what's happening, who's been maimed for life. Like we can't operate this way, y'all. This is a fucking team effort, and it has to be. When we have, incident that has national significance and all eyes are on us, and there's gonna be a fucking Lifetime movie about us later. Who would you like to play you in a Lifetime movie? And that would be my speech. I was like, I chose Sofia Vergara personally, but also I don't want some asshole like the bitch shows up and it's like, oh, that was Judith. No, thank you. So like talking to them in that way, and some of these gentlemen are so ego driven and they're in the spotlight a lot. You hear them, and it's kind of funny. So it appealed to that part of them. I was like, who do you want to play you in a Lifetime movie? I was like, all right, okay, Judith, like, what are we going to do here? And my final kind of my pact with God, so to speak, was like, I will finish this big national significant thing out and then I'm done. I think you sent me here for this purpose, for this time period. And when I wrap this up, that's it.
Were you also getting bored?
Yes.
Just checking.
Like the fraud cases are fun until like the 10th one. And then you're like, this isn't fun anymore.
You're done that. The t-shirt.
Yeah. Like, all right, I went on appeal.
Yay.
I went on appeal again. Oh, I was published. Cool. Oh, okay. You want me to just speak on stages and teach judges now? Sure. Cool. Like it totally loses its luster, and it's extremely stressful.
Yeah. But also very well paid.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is fun, right? And I think that's the reason so many people stay with it, even though it becomes very tedious for them. They're kind of stuck in that golden cage where they're like, this is nice.
I could keep doing this.
Yeah.
I don't have to blow everything up.
Yeah. So what did you do? Did you just hand in your notice? I mean, how did this go down, basically?
I found life coaching like 7 years ago now, 7 years ago. And I didn't believe it was a real thing. And I like fought tooth and nail that it was bullshit and a hoax. And
sometimes it is. And sometimes it's incredible.
It's a yes and.
Yes.
It's a yes and. I met Cara Lowenthal, who's also a former lawyer. And she really impressed upon me that like we can make something up. Like we can make something up. You can take these parts of things you love and coach the women that you want to coach and love on and encourage. And we just make it up. So we made something up. And then it was like the slow ramping up of the business and some boredom at work. Absolutely. Right. Like there's only so many hours you can build, or there's only so much gamifying of that system that you can do to keep it interesting.
Yes.
I know it's terrible. Right. But y'all, everyone listening, y'all feel me. I know you do.
100%.
Right. Like there's only so much like, hey, can I push the envelope here? Can I push on? Okay. Well, like, I feel like I've done what I've set out to do here at a certain point, right? It's just so funny to say out loud to someone. I don't think I've ever admitted that to
This is like all the listeners are going to be, yep.
Arrogant, right? Like, it's so funny. So there's all this mythos around taking the bar exam. And everyone's fish was probably about this big, but everybody claims the fish was this big kind of thing. And I have met a few other smart cookies along the way where we have gotten really quiet. And I have a colleague named Joe, and he's brilliant. And I was sitting next to him, and he and I were just like, and I was like, oh, Joe didn't think it was that hard either. I leaned over, I was like, you didn't think the bar was hard? He's like, no, I really didn't. I was like, did you finish early? He's like, yeah. I was like, we both finished the bar exam early. I was so trauma activated after. I circled the building like 3 times before I let my brain know I was allowed to leave now.
Yeah.
Like, right. So
sometimes my daughter will come home like after a test, and she'll be like, I was done in 20 minutes and now I'm freaking out that I like missed half the questions or something. Right? It's just kind of like, oh my God, there's such a gap between other people's experience. And then you take that on, you're like, this is what I'm supposed to be experiencing now. And it's so different that you can second guess yourself. Right?
Yeah. Horribly second guess yourself. Yeah. And you're like, I floated through that, but okay, I'm sorry you had a bad experience. Like, it doesn't diminish anyone's experience. I think this is the hard part for smart people sometimes is, or highly intelligent people, however we want to phrase that. Like, if you share that something was not hard for you, other people take that to mean you're diminishing their experience or invalidating their hardship. And I can speak only for myself. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. Yep. I do recognize it could be interpreted that way. So of course the natural inclination is to.
Right. To silence yourself. And that is like why I talk so much about, gifted guilt, smart shaming, et cetera, because people silence themselves too much. And there's also like, we have to get rid of this presupposition that smart people are out there trying to make other people feel miserable. I mean, some of us, there are some real dicks out there. Let's admit it. Like my IQ is bigger than yours, but that's a minority. And most people are just trying to lead an interesting life, right? And do meaningful work and make enough money to have some, nice subsistence. And yeah, their experience is different. But if I had to I don't know, let's think of something I totally suck at, like play soccer, right? My coordination is just dreadful. Like I totally suck at that. And I'm very good at maths. So, but I don't feel like the soccer people shame me because they're good at it.
Right.
I'm not like upset about them being maybe a little bit jealous, but yeah. we all have our things. But so basically you started a new business while you were still working as a lawyer.
Yeah, I started a business I tried multiple businesses. This will be no surprise to anyone. So the first iteration, I did try a dress business. So I actually had a handmade dress business. And I made all the dresses myself, which again, in retrospect, I'm like, why you could have, anyway, but I did. And it was okay. Great. We had beautiful
did you
branding.
Do this on the weekends or like, what did this look like?
At night, on the weekends, anytime I had a spare moment just to keep going.
Right. Keep it interesting. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. The second grader didn't grow up necessarily. It's just what she played with changed. So so there was that attempt. And then I tried a business called Plucky Gumption, which was a blog.
Oh.
And that was like, again, I have questions for myself, but the idea there was to talk about like death and legacy and like planning for like what happens when you die and like, does your family know what to do with your stuff? And like very practical, but that also felt heavy, which is funny because like I have the little taste of these came along with me. They just got repackaged differently in my current iteration of my business. And then there was the first iteration of my style business. And that has kind of stayed the course for the last few years.
That was kind of the thing. For now, anyway.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah. And do you think that now you have a sort of good idea of what you need to thrive? What kind of different things you need to be doing? How varied it needs to be? How you keep it challenging? All the things.
Yeah. I tried a year. I listened to some business advice, which was well meant, but now I'm like, oh my God, that was horrible. I spent a year. Someone told me you need to run the same. Oh my God. Like even thinking about it. You need to run the same webinar and the same marketing for a year.
What? Oh my God.
because you're doing too much and it's right. Oh my, right. You're just both of us.
People listening, my face just, I had to like.
Both of us are holding our faces to contain our brain explosion. Like that's the worst fucking advice for a creative, smart person. It was horrible. I didn't get through a year. I couldn't.
Bet you didn't.
I was
I
very
would have done
depressed.
3 probably, and then wanted to kill myself with boredom. Yeah.
I took 6. I gave it the good old college try for 6 months. I was very depressed by the end of the 6 months. It was not. This is not for me. I cannot do it this way. I have to create a business where I can create something new, some new idea, teach some new concept all the time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I will be a very unhappy person. And the current iteration of my business, because it's a membership, allows for that. So I can, like, on a whim, I'm like, I want to teach you this. I learned this new thing. This is amazing. Or I took this concept and here's what my brain did with it. And I just want to present it to you all to consider.
Yes.
Over and over and over again. And that's like so fun. Right. And I love the idea. Anytime I approach something, I like to call it like world building. And I think I had a lot of imaginary play when I was a child. Mm-hmm. And my imaginary friends, there are multiple of them. They had their own like little worlds that were connected. And then you could like open a door. And I mean, I have their names. I remember them very vividly. So like if I wanted to go from Betty and Peter's house, they were like cowboy farmer on a ranch. I could open a door and then end up in the city at Elle's house. And Elle was like a movie starlet who lived in the city. Like, so I think like that a lot when I'm creating something for my business, like the world of this, not just like the concept, the system, the framework, the process. Like, I mean, that has its merit, but I also like to world build first and then system, process, framework, methodology kind of thinking.
100%.
So,
I mean, structure is massively important, but structure can also kill everything if you sort of, let it rule instead of letting your creativity and your flow lead.
Yeah. And balancing that has been interesting.
Listen, we can talk about that for another hour because my first year as a coach was disastrous because I tried to be like a professional and do it properly. I mean, disastrous is an exaggeration, but I tried to be like straight-laced, right? All the things that I really wasn't. And that never works. That shit never works. But tell us, like, when you say, I love what you're saying, like, you can make, basically you make it up. What I actually hear is I am building what I want to build. I create what I want to see in the world. Yes. Right. Which is, I think, the beauty of what we get to do. And what I hear coming through in a lot of your work is also a lot of activism.
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a bit more about that. What do you want to change?
So we have a friend in common, Elena. And I was talking to her about the new thing a new thing I'm working on.
Of course.
And the idea behind it, right? No surprise. And she's a poet and we were talking about her poetry and I want her poetry to be featured. And we're talking about just my brand and things. And I was like, okay, I'm going to thought download a lot at you, but if my energy is too high, she's kind of introverted. I'm what someone would describe as extrovert and those kind of categories. But my energy can be very high. And if you're kind of quieter, I can be exhausting. So I warned her, I said, I'm going to tell you things, but if I'm going to exhaust you, please let me know. She's like, no, tell me all the things. So I was sharing it with her. And then she goes, you know, what's interesting? She's like, it's very charming and subversive and earnest. Mm-hmm. I was like,
yeah,
that, yes, that's it. Like
that's also what I saw on the stage, right? At Mastermind, right? Basically trying to change the way people think about even being a coach and being in the world.
Yeah.
100%.
And I mean, I like, there's so much I would like to see changed, but I also maybe get back to watching people's reactions to things and not being the well, actually girl all the time. Mm-hmm. How do I enlist you in this vision that I have in a way that you can fully understand why I'm asking you to come along with me? And it will be subversive because you're going to end up in a place where you're like, wait a minute, how did we end up here? Judith, what did you do? And I just like giggle, like, you want to come along for more? There's more. There's more to be had here. In a very charming way, and not in a bait and switch way. I don't particularly like that language. Yeah. If you really pay attention to what I'm saying to you, it's very there on the surface what I'm trying to enlist you in. I don't keep that secretive, right? Not like, now that you're in, here's the secret handshake. Like,
but listen, for people who don't, because I know your work and I know what you do.
Oh yes,
for
let
listeners,
me be clear.
We haven't even talked about that yet. No, we haven't really talked about that yet, and we will in the second part of the interview. So stay glued to the podcast feed for part the second. Hey, smart human. You're probably listening to this podcast because you want to learn how to manage that smart mind of yours. And the first step is actually getting your bearings, doing a little brain audit. And I have the perfect tool for that, the Mapping Your Unique Brain Workbook. And you can actually download it for free at www.coachkramer.org/brainmap. So that's coachkramer.org/brainmap. Go check it out and play with it and take your first step to managing your smart mind.